Thank you, Madam President. My name is Mark Pukita, and I live in Dublin. I spoke here on July 13th, 2021, and asked for tough, on-the-record, immediate votes on ending your disgusting and unconstitutional First Amendment restrictions and on repealing your racist 2020 equity resolution. You failed to vote on either. Conservatives should have been fighting for immediate emergency consideration of both. Instead, they cowered in the corner at the slightest pushback and then sat on their hands from then on. Instead of acting, they protected others from tough, on-the-record votes, maybe even protecting themselves from a tough, on-the-record vote that would show what kind of people Governor DeWine has appointed to the board. Parents have been clamoring for action for a year. They deserved real action in July before schools went back in session. Instead, they got inaction in a useless John Hagan request to Dave Yost to write a letter to the board on the constitutionality of the equity resolution. Parents have been, that proved to be a waste of time that resolved nothing, except that a contractor cannot be forced to take implicit bias training. Wow. Is that what parents are mad about? Is that what they wanted from you? Of course not. They wanted the equity resolution repealed, not kick the can swamp politics. When I spoke in July, Mr. Hagan lectured me. He called me my guns a-blazing approach dumb. He accused me of thinking I was the smartest guy in the room. With all due respect, I may not be the smartest guy in the room, but I am the guy in the room calling you out and exposing you for wasting time and failing Ohio parents, children, and families. In July, you had a chance to act before the schools opened to force a vote on repeal of the equity resolution. You could have pressed for an emergency consideration to restore First Amendment rights and to repeal the equity resolution. Instead, you played typical swamp politics. You failed Ohio parents, children, and families. Will you do the same here today? Today is another opportunity for there to be a straight-up resolution to simply repeal the equity resolution. Your rules allow for a resolution to be declared an emergency, acted on, and made effective today. If the President and Vice President do not allow emergency consideration, any member can demand an on-the-record vote of the board on emergency consideration. You all know this. Why don't you do it? We want to know where you all stand on September 21st, 2021. On the record, particularly Governor DeWine's appointees, I've provided a very simple sample resolution to repeal the equity resolution. Let me read it. Whereas on July 14, 2020, the State Board of Education passed the resolution entitled Resolution to Condemn Racism and to Advance Equity and Opportunity for Black Students, Indigenous Students, and Students of Color, hereafter the equity resolution. And whereas the equity resolution has caused division and dissent when it was intended to foster unity and collaboration, therefore, be it resolved that the State Board of Education repeals the equity resolution effective immediately, and be it further resolved that the State Board of Education instructs the Ohio Department of Education to suspend all policies enacted as a result of the equity resolution effective immediately. We don't need more than that. We don't need a resolution watered down with symbolic words. We need simple, direct, guns a-blazing. We need there to be no excuses to not act now, today, on the record, as an emergency. Before I conclude, I want guests here, as well as those watching online, to understand that this board requires all testimony to be submitted well ahead of time in writing for approval, and that members receive a copy so they can prepare to question and condescend to regular citizens like me. To say this is a rigged game staged to give members the upper hand is a gross understatement. Thank you for this chance to speak. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions from board members? Ms. Hill?
Thank you, Mr. Pukita, for your testimony. I want to ask you about one of the comments at the end of your testimony where you said something along the lines of that the board requires in writing testimony for approval. I don't think that's correct. It may be the practice, but I don't think it's a requirement that the public supply written testimony to be approved. And perhaps
Do you want
someone
to get
could
Alex
address
to chime
that.
in? I had.
That,
May I answer?
well, do you know the answer?
No, but I'd like to respond. All I will tell you is the last time I came, we were told we had to submit a request to speak and our testimony. And we went through 4 versions before it was approved. And this time we got it through first time. Now, maybe that's not the process, but that's what I believe we were told and my team was told.
Yes, Ms. Hill?
In our agenda for the meeting, it is written, individuals wishing to testify can do so on Tuesday morning at the Department of Education and should send their name and written testimony. It doesn't say shall. It seems more permissive and requesting, not mandatory. And prior to our meetings being online, starting in 2020 and through the early 2021, before we went to online meetings, individuals could appear at our meeting, not even having given notice that they were coming, and they didn't need to supply a written testimony. And they could just come in the room and sign up to speak, and then you would have a list of the people who could speak. But I don't believe the board has voted on any change in practice, or it's written in our policy, though correct me if I'm wrong, that it's required for notice or for written testimony to be supplied.
You are correct, Ms. Hill. We did, it is permissive. It's not a requirement. And in fact, we had an individual who came to speak to us this morning about one of the rules who had not signed up in advance. So you are not required to sign up in advance. We appreciate the courtesy of knowing who's coming and how many are coming, and certainly those who want to submit their testimony in advance are encouraged to do so. I particularly like to read it before I come to the board meeting, but it's not a requirement. So.
Then why did 3 versions get rejected by Alex the last time I was here? I mean, they were rejected.
Mr. Goodman?
I did not reject any version. You had mentioned the equity resolution, which was a topic that at the time was not permissive.
So it was rejected.
Mr. Goodman was following the policy put in place by the chair that limited oral testimony on 2 topics. One was the resolution, and the other was the 1619 project.
Right.
And he was helping me know, helping me in my desire to limit testimony pro and con on those 2 topics.
Okay.
And I think that's what happened.
Right. So he was enforcing the policy of not allowing people to speak freely up here and control language.
That is not the case, but I choose not to. I don't believe it's helpful to get into a debate with you about
That's
this.
fine.
Yes, Mr. Poklar.
May I follow up?
I follow up, yes, and then Mr. Poklar.
Yeah, just to finish the loop on this, I would like then for the written advice on the agenda and what is sent out prior to meetings to indicate to the public that it's not a requirement, that they may appear without prior notice or submitting it in writing.
I don't believe it would be difficult to make that adjustment, Ms. Hill, to clarify it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Poklar.
Thanks for helping with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the witness. Question, and this is kind of paraphrasing, so I'm going to try to get it close, but you spoke a little bit about your impression of what parents and students and families think about this issue, and I'm interested if you, from your perspective, do you think that there are also parents and families and children that have concerns about racism and equity, and that is an important topic to be tackled? Are you saying that doesn't exist, or are you just saying that this is not the way to do it?
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying there is a concern about racism or whatever that doesn't exist. I'm saying that this is not the way to go about it. I mean, most of you here understand the basis of critical race theory. It comes from critical theory, right? And critical theory is a Marxist construct. I mean, that's a fact, right? So that's what I object to, and what parents that I've met with in 88 counties as I've been campaigning object to. And I'm here to represent them.
Mr. Poklar, would you like to have a follow-up?
Can you point out in the resolution from July 14 where it references critical race theory?
Well, are we really going to play this game where we use code words? I mean, we know what that resolution is all about. I mean, seriously? I don't have it in front of me, but if you want to provide it to me, I'll gladly go through it and point it out.
That statement is dripping with irony. I'll just leave it at that.
There's the condescension I talked about and warned people about, all you folks watching outside.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Hagan.
I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate you calling me out and calling me a coward, along with anyone else that I guess you consider a conservative in the room. I think that's telling of who you are, okay? I do appreciate that you're here to speak, and that's a good thing, because the public should be allowed to speak. I do find it almost comical in your approach. So you may consider after this race trying out for stand-up comedy.
That's offensive. That's offensive. And you did it last time.
Mr. Hagan, response?
As opposed to what you said about members of this board, that's offensive? Really?
What about it was untrue?
It was all untrue.
That's not true.
You don't understand the process.
No, I do understand the process, and I understand you're hiding behind the process. You could have an emergency resolution and get this taken care of today, and I actually gave you a simple copy. I read it. I got the resolution in and read it in 5 minutes with my testimony. And I gave you the process that you know you can follow to do it, but you're not going to do it because you're afraid to do it. Well, why wouldn't you do it, John?
First of all, being a former legislator, understanding that working with people is always better than working against people. If you know that your resolution is not going to pass, you work with the members to try to get to a point where you could pass it, as opposed to an in-your-face, call-you-out approach. So that is why I won't do it. I certainly agree that it's something that we need to work towards. I think that at some point we're going to be a lot better off than we are right now in reference to the resolution. And I think your assessment of the Attorney General's opinion is drastically different than what the opinion says.
Well, I'd love an explanation on that, on Dave Yost's opinion. But what I will tell you is, as a legislator, you also understand that there are times that you need to put people on the record for an up or down vote so voters can understand where they stand. And that's what you're afraid of doing here.
I'm going to move on at this point to Mrs. Fessler, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since you are given to some measure of criticism, I find that I am perhaps in risk of you going round about the state claiming that Fessler didn't pay a bit of attention to the board meeting. And I want to tell you now, so you don't do that. I have a family member that's critically ill, and you think I'm playing on my phone. This is a prayer circle that's going on, and I'm cutting and pasting as fast as I can, get as many people as I can to pray. It's a critical time and far more important than you will ever have to say. You're an offensive individual. You have no idea what you're talking about, but I can forgive you for that because sometimes what you don't know, you just don't know. But at least you can be nice about not knowing what you don't know. That's all, Madam Chair.
Ms. Fessler, I'm sorry. Ms. Fessler, I'm sorry you're going through that. I have no idea where you got the impression that I would go around the state saying that. Where did that come from? Perhaps you're just in a bad place, and I understand it, so I apologize.
Okay, I think we are going to end our conversation at this point. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
You're welcome.
And we are going to move on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Beth Murdock. Sorry, Mike. Welcome, Ms. Murdock. Thanks for being here. You'll have 5 minutes as well.
President Kohler and members of the State Board of Education of Ohio, thank you for allowing me to speak with you today in support of Dr. Kilgore's resolution about public participation in State Board of Education meetings and the need to update the policy and procedures manual of the State Board of Education so that people can continue to speak freely to you about all educational topics, not just topics you choose. I've been watching your meetings for over a year now, and I have seen the conflicts between board members as they struggle to get their views heard and recognized. What has been abundantly clear to anybody who watches these meetings is that there's a significant number of State Board of Education members who feel they have won on issues relating to critical race theory and the 1619 Project. These members consider the July 14th, 2020 resolution issued by the State Board of Education to be old news, and they are tired of hearing the same topics over and over again. With all due respect to these members, you are not listening to the citizens of Ohio. There have been protests outside this building today, protests all over the state, protests last month. Parents should have the right to protest for as long as it takes against educational policies that proclaim, quote, equity is our plan's greatest imperative and number one principle. Shouldn't education be the number one imperative for this board? These protests are typical and valued response to divisive topics. You should not tire of hearing about the same topic or wish to shut down speech on any educational topic. Instead, you should aspire to meaningful and open dialogue about these topics, and above all, you should listen to what people have to say. The need for Dr. Kilgore's resolution arises directly from the anti-speech actions of President Kohler. I'm aware that many of you will leap to President Kohler's defense, but I'm not criticizing President Kohler as an individual, and I think she's done an admirable job in challenging times. Nonetheless, her actions as president have led to a situation that the people of Ohio cannot condone. In November of 2020, President Kohler made a unilateral decision to limit public comment on the topics of critical race theory and 1619 Project. Yes, I said the terms President Kohler has declared unspeakable before this state board. I am a citizen of Ohio and an American, and neither President Kohler nor this board can take away my right to speak certain words aloud. Then, in April 2020, President Kohler considered revisiting her unilaterally imposed policy but decided to leave the ban in place on these two topics. This led to a lawsuit by Daniel P. Reginald against not only the State Board of Education, but individual members Laura Kohler, Christina Collins, Merrill Johnson, Martha Manchester, and Antoinette Miranda. Think about that for a moment. You, the State Board of Education, are going to waste valuable taxpayer dollars fighting a lawsuit about free speech because you have allowed the president of the State Board of Education to adopt a policy that prevents people from coming before you and talking about two topics that are obviously important and clearly related to the education of Ohio students. I believe the State Board of Education is clearly within its right to set certain time and place limitations on speech. You can provide that speech will only happen during a certain portion of your public meetings, and you can limit people to certain amounts of time to speak before you. I do not believe, however, that you have the legal right to curtail the content of speech. Not only is it a violation of the First Amendment rights of people, it is distinctly un-American to shut down debate in this fashion. America is founded on a core set of principles, and one of the most important of these is the right to speak freely and to criticize anybody, including the government and even the State Board of Education. As long as you continue to provide a forum for public speech, you must abolish President Kohler's anti-American policy and allow anybody who wishes to speak to you on educational topics to speak about any educational topic they like. You can act like my local school board does. My local school board pretends to listen to the parents, and they sit quietly and do not engage or participate with parents who express real and valid concerns for their children's education. But at the very least, you can sit here and listen to what people have to say to you without telling them you can say anything you want except for these two phrases. Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? That's your policy. This is absurd, and this is anti-speech. People are watching this meeting to see how the State Board of Education will handle this Dr. Kilgore's resolution. Will the State Board of Education change its policies and procedures manual to take away the right of the president to unilaterally impose content-based speech restrictions on people? Will the State Board of Education acknowledge and affirm its commitment to true free speech and pass Dr. Kilgore's resolution? I'd like to close by stating very plainly what a no vote on Dr. Kilgore's resolution means.
I would ask you to very quickly finish your remarks, please. You're out of time.
Okay. If you vote no on Dr. Kilgore's resolution, you're voting against free speech. It is that simple. Support free speech, even speech you don't like. Vote yes on Dr. Kilgore's resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poklar.
Thank you for coming. And so clarification, and again, I'm kind of paraphrasing from what you said, but I think you said you believe the board has the right to set parameters. They just can't say yes or no, you can say something. So parameters including when, in what portion, etc. Isn't that exactly what happened here? We had months of testimony on this, and then the chair said, we're moving on to something else. We've now actually begun having additional testimony. So it's not that people can't come and talk about it. It's just that this body, like pretty much every elected body that I'm aware of, legislative, municipal, set parameters on so that we can do the business of this board and hear from the people. So I guess the question I have for you is, it sounds like what you testified to endorsed exactly what this board did. Did I misunderstand that?
I believe that you can set parameters and should set parameters as to time and place, not content. So you can set aside and say, we have 30 minutes for public participation, and when that time is up, that time is up. But I do not believe that parameters involving content of public speech should be included in that.
Do you have a follow-up, Mrs.
Yeah, follow-up.
Poklar?
So,
Mr. Poklar.
So when you say time and place, it means if there's an opening for testimony, people should be able to say whatever they want on whatever topic, not we will take testimony on this issue at this time and this issue on that time. Is that what you're saying?
If it's an open forum for public testimony, individuals should be able to determine the content of that testimony, in my opinion.
I just don't understand how this is a unique issue for this body. I mean, this is, you go to the legislature and testify in an issue, you will have a day where there's proponent testimony on a bill and a day when there isn't, and proponents go at that time. And you don't just show up and say whatever you want whenever you want. There's a schedule. And I guess I don't understand why this body would do anything different than everyone else does.
So I believe you are suggesting that that this board has testimony on certain subjects at certain places, but as long as you have an area in the agenda for open public testimony, content should not be a part of it. So again, if this board decides that you don't want to hear open public testimony and you want to restrict testimony to, as in the legislature, on a particular voting item, that's a decision that I do not personally support, but could potentially be made.
Okay. That's a helpful distinction. It may be something for us to consider as we do agenda. So thank you.
All right. Yep. Thank you. Ms. Newman.
Great. Thank you, President Kohler. And thank you. And you've been with us before, haven't you?
Yes.
So thank you for coming. And thank you for providing the testimony in written form. I do kind of want to speak to that. Just for the public, it is exceptionally helpful for us as we come into the room to have a chance to read, to analyze, to potentially do research, to be able to look and be able to make educated comments. So it is incredibly helpful. So thank you for providing that, because it's also a touchstone if we go back and say, oh, what did that person say at a meeting? It's right there for us to be able to look at. So I appreciate that greatly. Just a point here that I did want to point out, which is in the second paragraph of your statement that says, I've been watching your meetings for nearly a year now, and I have seen the conflict between board members as they struggle to get their views heard and recognized. What has been abundantly clear to anybody who watches these meetings is that there is a significant number of State Board of Education members who feel that they have won on a variety of politicized educational topics. One of the things that I appreciate about being a part of this board is that we do not all agree. The point of these meetings is to sit here and to talk about these difficult topics and have those discussions, because the fact is the best outcomes we can come to are probably somewhere in the middle of where everyone stands. And so I encourage you to keep watching the meetings, and I encourage us to continue to argue and to talk about these important topics, because that is what we were brought here to do. That does not mean we are failing. It means we are doing our job. So I just did want to address that. Thank you.
Mrs. Fessler?
Good morning. Thank you for coming to testify. Part of mine is comment, part of mine is dialogue. I think almost all of our problems would be solved if we simply followed Robert's Rules of Order. Works for everybody else, but for some reason not for our board. You did say that you thought it would be okay if the board set a fixed period of time for testimony. I think that would be a very bad thing to do, because it's just another way of limiting testimony. In the past, when I've been on the board, we had so many people that wanted to come and testify, we actually moved the meeting to a gymnasium. Now, the people that were coming to testify were dangerous people. They were mommies holding their babies with the 2-year-old in a stroller. So this was not a problem with unruliness at all. But frankly, the leadership didn't want to hear them either. But if you put a 2-minute limit on someone's testimony and we're only going to take testimony for 15 minutes, we've cut out a whole slew of people, and that should never happen. Frankly, we should have nothing else to do, pretty much, than listen to the people that reportedly we represent. So I'm glad that you came today. Come back more often. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And yes, Dr. Collins?
I want to ask about the parameters your local board has put in place, because while I agree that our job is to listen, I do make it a point to do my listening at all times between board meetings as well. And it's my perspective that when we come together like this, it's our job to do business. and we have business that has to be accomplished. So I am hearing about local boards having meetings that are 3 and 4 hours long because of public testimony, and I feel for those board members and communities because it's impossible to get work done in those situations. So can you tell us what your local board has put in place and how those parameters seem to be working for their business and your community?
Absolutely. I believe that as our local board sets 30 minutes aside for testimony, for any kind of public participation to speak on any topics that people wish to speak on. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes of time. Frankly, they allow for questions back and forth. That rarely, if ever, happens on our local board. So that means basically 5 people can speak during a board meeting. I have attended only a single board meeting where that 30-minute limit was exceeded and there were more people that wanted to testify than that could accommodate. And using Robert's Rules of Order, our local board presented a motion to continue to hear testimony. That motion passed, and everyone who attended was able to speak. That was a long meeting, I agree, but I think it made everyone feel good that their voice was heard. And I believe that, one of the reasons that we or anyone hears the same messages over and over again and you sort of get tired about it is because you feel the person speaking feels like they're not being heard. And that is why they keep saying the same things over and over again. So, making every effort to make sure people feel like they've been heard also will contribute to that as well.
Thank you very much. Just one point of clarification and one observation. The point of clarification is I just want to make sure that you know that when the subject matter was restricted to written testimony only, that applied equally to both sides. Yes. So it's not an attempt to shut down one particular point of view. It was done in an effort to streamline and make our meetings manageable at a time when we'd heard a lot of testimony, and I could not see a probability that anyone's mind was going to be changed at that point in time by any further testimony. So just so you know, it did apply to both points of view. And then my observation is that the whole concept of public testimony is one that I think is ripe for some work by this board. And my hope is that we not be reactionary, but that we actually have some meaningful dialogue about how do we balance the needs of our needs to hear from members of the public with our need to conduct our business in a timely and efficient manner. And so that is something that as chair, I will tell you I will make a priority. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Dr. Kilgore.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you for being here and your comments. And I think that one of the points that she makes, and that I won't say that we tend to forget, but we get distracted from, is that upon election and appointment, we are public servants. And in order to be a public servant, we need to be open to comments and to hear our constituents in order to represent them well. And some of us are, and I'm not even going to talk about how isolated some of us may be because of our other functions or our other responsibilities, or not. I mean, everybody defines we're elected because of who we are, and our constituency believes that we will represent them well. And I believe that, and being involved in local government, the recognition that all public input was necessary for us to re-examine what we think we knew about what they wanted or believed or expected us, how they expected us to perform. So I think that this is important, and I appreciate you coming to the podium, comfortable or uncomfortable, to have made your statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.